I'm Elizabeth Newsom and welcome to my BookTube channel. So today we're going to talk about books that every writer must have. And I thought I'd film this at my writing desk because we're talking about writing. So first of all, I need to invest in some legit nerdy glasses. And I have a totally legitimate reason to get actual glasses. And I still don't have any. But now that my intro's over, I won't use these anymore. And when I say that every writer must have these books, really, this is just kind of an excuse to look at the writing books I have on my bookshelf. A lot of these books cover the same topic, so I'd recommend just taking and picking what books you think you need the most. And we'll start with these three at the top. So we have Book Proposals That Sell, Step-by-Step Pitches and Proposals, How Can I Find a Literary Agent? So these last two are by MacGregor. I met him at my first writers conference, and he was the very first literary agent that I had an appointment with. But I actually haven't read these books just because I've decided to take more of a self-publishing route, and you don't really need a literary agent to represent you, obviously, if you're self-publishing. But he's a pretty legit guy, so if you need helps with pitching or getting agent appointments, make sure to read these books. And then this is just a book I have. I can't say anything positive or negative about it since I know nothing about the author or the book other than the title. Then we have On Writing by Stephen King. This book was recommended to me last year at a writers conference, and I've heard multiple writers talk about this book. So the first part is biographical and it talks a little about his life and his journey as a writer, and then the next part covers a lot of basic writing tips. I think I found the biographical part the most interesting just because I always think it's interesting to hear about how someone became who they are today. The writing tips part's pretty good, but if you've read any amount of writing books or been to pretty much any writing workshops, you've probably heard the tips. Like how you should cut out adverbs and use as few words as possible to communicate what you want to say. Then we have writing the Breakout novel. I first heard of this when I went to my second ACFW conference and the author was teaching the Early Bird. And then I heard it recommended a few times after I attended the Early Bird, so I decided to look it up, and eventually I bought it and I read it. So it's got a lot of good information in it. It covers the basics of writing and how to keep the tension going throughout your novel. As far as writing advice goes, this is probably better than On Writing, just because it covers more information. But it's also pretty basic. It talks about upping the stakes throughout the story. It talks about the hero's journey. Overall, it just depends how familiar you are with basic writing methods. And then we have Storyworld first by Williamson, which is not thick enough to stand on its own. So this was recommended to me by Nadine Brandes. She's done 2 editorial reviews for me. So after reading my manuscript, which is a fantasy manuscript, she recommended this to help my world building. And it's really helpful. It just covers a lot of things and aspects of world building that you probably wouldn't think of otherwise, like systems of government, plant life, vernacular language, different abilities, types of magic, creating creatures, naming creatures, culture and economics. And in this, she talks about a Storyworld Bible, which is essentially like a big document that you've sorted out in Word, or it can be a project in Scrivener. And that idea has been really helpful for me. I have this big, long Word document where I keep track of different types of botany in my world, different classes of people, I have a map, I have layouts of the palace, all sorts of things. And that was really inspired by this book. So if you're writing fantasy and you need help world building and you want to think of more details, then I definitely recommend checking this out. Then Structuring Your Novel by Weiland, which does also not stand up by itself. There we go. I got it. So if any of you guys have checked out the website helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com, then you're probably familiar with a lot of the content in this book, because Weiland is the owner of that website and also, as you can see, the author of this book. So I found it really helpful to be familiar with story structure, and I highlighted a lot, as you can see. And overall, I do structure my novels before writing them, but my style is a lot looser than hers. I find that if I try to stick to a story structure point by point, sometimes the work just doesn't turn out like it's supposed to. So now I try to just have a general idea of the character arc and just to continue it throughout the course of the story and make sure interesting things keep happening and keep up the tension. And that personally seems to work better for me. But this is worth checking out if you're interested in really detailed story structure. Then the first 50 pages by Gerke. This was also recommended to me by Nadine Brandes to kind of get me familiar with, to help familiarize me with some of the basic writing concepts. So it talks about the submission process and a list of what your first 50 pages must accomplish. Like how you have to introduce your main character, make the story engaging, introduce the character's inner journey. So it covers a lot of basics, all of which are good to know. Then we have Stein on Writing, which I read sometime last year. So as I've gone to writers' conferences and met with other writers, I've heard this book recommended over and over and over, so I knew that I had to check it out. So what's interesting about this book is it covers a lot of writing techniques for both fiction and nonfiction. And this is pretty thorough and it covers a lot of good information. It's probably one of the best books on writing techniques that I've ever read. So just looking at the contents, it covers the actor's studio method for developing drama and plots, the basics of plotting, suspense, the adrenaline pump. So if you need help on sheer writing technique and not so much overall plot or character, then you have to check this book out because it's really good, and in case you can't tell by the thickness of the book, it's also very thorough. Then there's Plot vs. Character by Gerke. This is the last book that Nadine Brandes recommended me. So a lot of times writers are asked if they're more plot first or character first writers. And this book shows you how to develop both and how both are necessary for a great story. So I have this book sectioned off. This is about character, how to make them likable, their core attributes, how to make them interesting. And this section, as you can see right here, covers the character's inner journey and how you can develop that. And then finally, this last section right here is for plot. So unlike the book about story structure by K.M. Weiland, the plot section of this book more just covers plot overall, like in Act 1, 2, 3, instead of splitting it up into the first half of the second act, the second half of the second act, the third pinch point, the second pinch point. And I kind of like more this method of plotting just because it gives you a lot more flexibility to develop and to make the story sound more natural. Overall, this book covers a lot of really good concrete basics. And I think if you have these two books, as far as the writing goes, you're pretty much set. And then finally, your first 1,000 copies, which is my favorite marketing book. I've read it twice. Your first 1,000 copies just talks about giving your readers the maximum value possible, like through offering free material on your blog and interacting with readers and creating valuable content for them. It just covers a lot of good basics, and what I love about this book is not only that it covers those basics, but just the whole philosophy of giving people the maximum value that you can. Seriously, like just looking at this book makes me want to read it all over again. Then finally, there are these three. So these are really interesting. They're not exactly traditional writing books with split up chapters on writing techniques, but as you can see by the titles, they're all thesauruses. So the positive thesaurus covers positive traits in a character, like see this page for example, it says cooperative, it gives you a definition, category, similar attributes, possible causes of being cooperative, associated behaviors, associated thoughts, associated emotions, positive aspects and negative aspects, example from films, traits and supporting characters that may cause conflict, and challenging scenarios for the cooperative character. So as you're brainstorming core traits for your character, this would be a really good resource, as would the negative trait thesaurus. It's essentially the same as the positive thesaurus and covers the same categories, but of course they're negative adjectives. And then we have the emotion thesaurus. So this covers a variety of emotions and kind of physical body languages that accompany them. A few of the physical signals of dread are holding the stomach as if pained, clutching arms to one's chest, shoulders curling forward, caving the chest in, a bent neck, etc., etc. And then internal sensations would be a rolling stomach, heavier, sluggish heartbeat, chills, cold fingers, tingling in the chest. Mental responses would be thoughts of escape, wanting to hide, wishing time would speed up. So if you need help describing an emotion and showing the physical attributes and some of the internal sensations, this is also a really good resource. And one more thing. I'm having a Q&A video in a few weeks, so if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, then please leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. And I'd love to know what writing books you guys have read. Let me know down below, and I will see you next time.